How many discounts does USAA Auto Insurance offer? Too many to say here. Multi-vehicle discount, safe driver discount, new vehicle discount, storage discount, legacy.
How many discounts will you stack up? Visit USAA.com/auto discounts. Restrictions apply.
You are tuned in to the FowlWeather Podcast, the forecast to your next successful hunt. Coming to you from the home office, Jack's Reef, New York.
Among the absolute cornerstones of waterfowl conservation and management is banding data. While recovery rates of bands on passerines, or songbirds, like chickadees, might be 2% at best, because waterfowl are harvested species, waterfowl biologists have an abundance of recovery data from bands to use in population modeling and for tracking migration. Why is banding data so vital to waterfowl management in North America? Find out today on the FowlWeather Podcast. In response to a massive amount of misinformation coming across your wavelengths, the FowlWeather Podcast embarked on the 2025 DataStream series. It can be attractive to find conspiracies that help explain what you observe as a duck hunter, or maybe you have even thought up some fun fake news yourself. The reality is that the long history of data used in waterfowl conservation and management in North America is a success story that everyone deserves to hear. Bumps and bruises we have, but dedicated we are as the people across Duck Country, USA, dedicated to the long-term health of ducks and duck hunting. This series dives deep into how the breeding waterfowl surveys, banding, and harvest surveys and models work. Join us to learn more and share this great information with all the great people across Duck Country, USA. Remember this last season, you knew where the ducks were at before the ducks knew where they were at. We are very thankful for our every week listeners. You know who you are. Those that never miss a single migration forecast episode each Monday morning. Y'all are as ate up as me about ducks, duck biology, and duck migration. Our dedicated weekly listeners can pick the best days to hunt because the FowlWeather Podcast forecasts fresh ducks hot from the north. You know where the ducks are at before the ducks know where they're at, right? Shoot the ducks from the north before they know where they're at. Also, just a reminder as well to take a minute to rate us on Spotify and Apple Podcast or wherever you listen. We appreciate your support very, very much. I'm your host, Dr. Mike, coming to you from the home office in Jack's Reef. Well, turkey season has started out slow for us. And like the last few years, we had strutters and intense gobbling activity near the farm and during the 2 weeks before season, kind of during the youth weekend, but they seem to have vaporized. So we went south and north of the farm an hour's drive and heard birds both days. We worked a big bunch of jakes one day, but nothing in the bag yet. When up north, we saw a bunch of wandering hens, like hens not sitting in one place and feeding, but actively moving across the landscape, which we suspect are young hens dispersing. In contrast, down here at the farm, we are already seeing hens at the same places each day feeding quickly in green field edges and then heading back in, and we suspect they are taking incubation breaks and already have full clutches. So we are seeing the dispersal activity about 2 weeks ago at the farm that we were talking about up north and southern parts of the state, and now they seem to be sitting. So here's the bad news, though. We have been in a cold and wet, rainy cycle for days, kind of starting on Saturday, the 3rd of May, and it looks like it's going to go through Wednesday, the 7th of May. Again, I record these things ahead of time once in a while. Next weekend, I'm in Western New York for Mother's Day, taking care of Mom and chasing turkeys in my hometown. So I'm getting this recording done a little bit ahead of time today. But what it looks like is that we've got this really nasty cold and wet rain from about this last Saturday, the 3rd of May, and going through, again, Wednesday, the 7th of May. And that's a known problem for nest survival in our part of the world. Dr. Bill Porter at ESF, back when we had turkey research going on in New York through Dr. Porter's lab, he and grad students studied 206 nests over 3 years in the early 1990s, specifically 1990 to 1993, from May 1st until the 9th of June, and detected that daily nest survival was reduced with greater rain than normal, but then positively the survival of those nests, that is likelihood of hatching, that was positively associated with heating degree days. Now, we have a lot of May and early June left, and starting on this kind of Thursday, 8th of May coming up, the long-term forecast is for drier than, normal, I would say, and hopefully starting to get warm. So hopefully we recover and we get a really good hatch again this year. Last year, we had a record warm month of May in New York, and we had pretty insane reproduction with lots of poults being seen by everyone. In our neighborhood, we had 30 poults that we counted alone and did our report to New York State Department of Environmental Conservation for their poult survey. Now, right, of course, some of them don't make it and many disperse, but good news for a place that has seen plummeting turkey numbers now for about 15 years. The north to south difference in hen behavior also highlights something different and important to turkey hunters. Our standard 1 month, the month of May turkey season, might not be appropriate for the whole entire state. As everything winds down by the 3rd week of May in the southern portion of New York, it is still going strong up north. So we also seem to hit peak gobbling activity right on the head in northern New York, but are at the backside and on the slide in the south some years later in the season. Maybe with a warming climate, it's time to rethink New York turkey season structure. I'm also not really worried about bothering the breeding process in turkeys with hunting. I do think that is a bit of a red herring. Hen turkeys can carry sperm for about 30 days, so even if their boys are gone, they still have a way to fertilize eggs. There also should be more males than we can shoot. So anyhow, she should be able to still breed well into late spring. Second nests are also sometimes more successful, at least in the north, than early nests that are susceptible to lots of variability in spring weather. That all said about restructuring turkey seasons and maybe opening them up earlier in the south and then later in the north, that split season also could create a lot more pressure because you have 2 different opening days. So there might be a way that would be needed to meter how many people from the south can go north and how many people from the north can come south. I don't know. Anyhow, maybe we leave it as just the month of May because we still have variation in our weather and we do have gobbling activity during that whole entire time. But food for thought. The season in New York has been just set for the month of May for a very long time with no analysis. So it's probably time to get after that and think about it a bit more to provide better opportunity for the great people across turkey country, USA. All right, enough about turkeys for now. But one thing is certain, our turkey population seems very susceptible to cold, wet spring weather, and maybe that is the single link of this relatively inbred population. Maybe every hen turkey in our population is of the same ancestry and is susceptible to cold, wet springs because they are inbred and don't have a diversity of adaptations in the population to have a few individuals that can successfully nest in cold, wet conditions and win. Anyhow, if you haven't heard our episode 80 tag-out tips, turkey tag-out tips and why turkeys are tanking, go give it a listen for more on our hypothesis about turkey decline across turkey country, USA. Up next, how we use banding data to inform waterfowl management, so please stick with us. Beckman Game Calls has it dialed in. If you want a duck call that is adjustable to your air pressure and sounds like a duck, this is it. I've blown a ton of different calls in my life, but this one is the real deal. Look, we don't endorse just anything. We are only going to put forward a call that works. The Edison by Chris Beckman of Beckman Game Calls? Yeah, this beauty sounds like a duck. I only know of one published research paper focused on what makes a duck call sound like a duck. Go look me up and you will see that colleagues and I have the only paper published in scientific literature about what makes a duck call sound like a duck. For sure, Chris Beckman did his homework and this call sounds like a duck. This guy knows how to make a duck call, period. But don't just take my word for it. Here's the proof. First, a hen recording, and then the Edison in the big woods of Arkansas. Visit them today at BeckmanGameCalls.com. The stories of band recoveries are awesome by hunters. A band is a highly sought-after piece of jewelry for every duck hunter I've ever met. But what is the utility of banding data? Why do we band so many waterfowl each year? Of course, the flyway concept was built out of banding data, but it is so much more. I'm going to cover a bunch of terminology used by folks that band waterfowl, but mostly operationally how banding happens and how those data are used. The grandfather of modern-day wildlife management, Aldo Leopold, in his famous book, A Sand County Almanac, in the chapter entitled December, writes this: "To band a bird is to hold a ticket in a great lottery." But of course, it is so much more, and also so little. To band is humbling to the mind of perception about the lives of birds. That is, it reveals truths outside perception, and in that we must live so we can manage waterfowl with effectiveness and efficiency. Leopold writes about a black-capped chickadee with band number 65290. And in this is what he says. During his 6th winter, 65290 failed to reappear, and the verdict of missing in action is now confirmed by his absence during 4 subsequent trappings. At that, of 97 chicks banded during the decade, 65290 was the only one contriving to survive for 5 winters. 3 reached 4 years, 7 reached 3 years, 19 reached 2 years, and 67 disappeared after their first winter. In this, I think Leopold speaks very deeply about the need for conservation of places for birds because we have so little wiggle room time-wise. The reason you see chickadees at your feeder each year is because we have an environment in which they can live, right? The alternative is to die, which of course some must do in the grand pyramid of life. The same for ducks. So it is all about habitat. In an age where we seemingly are devaluing the environment for profit, we should be doing the opposite. We should be doing the opposite at least if we care about wild things and wild places like ducks and marshes. More and more, everyone should pick up a copy of A Sand County Almanac by Aldo Leopold and read it. Not just once, but read it and live by the teachings held within. I buy 20 paper copies every year and give them away to students. It was life-changing for me, and I hope it inspires them as well. All right. Went sideways a bit there, and philosophical maybe. But I do hope you listened very closely. And if you did not, like a lot of listeners say, they go back and listen to these comments sometimes once again.
This message is brought to you by Abercrombie Kids, where the activewear is made for every summer activity, so your mini-me can bring their personal best. Summer days are always an adventure, from day camp to rec leagues and pool days. Abercrombie Kids has the shorts, tees, and swim to keep them comfy and keep up with them. Get everything for the entire summer at Abercrombie Kids. Shop in-store, online, or in the app.
All right, on to banding. First and foremost, no one ever can just go band waterfowl without a federal banding permit because these data need to be closely collected, cataloged, and then made available from a single information repository. All of this is centralized for efficiency and effectiveness, again, those buzzwords these days, by the USGS Bird Banding Lab, which is centrally located for all this coordinated work. So how does one get a federal master banding permit or become a sub-permittee under that federal master banding permit? Banding permits are only put forward for necessary waterfowl monitoring efforts or for specific research projects with a connection to waterfowl management. So in short, there is, or at least should not be, any recreational banding happening. But even to get a master banding permit where you are in charge of bands and uploading data, you are typically a sub-permittee under somebody else's master banding permit or for many of us, have been a sub-permittee under several master banding permits previously. All right, but let's stop. Let's also consider that you don't just get a carte blanche banding permit for all birds. You typically have a specialty where you have been trained. For example, my master banding permit allows me to catch and band waterfowl and rails. That is it. That is all. I don't have a permit for songbirds, which is a whole nother beast and set of techniques in and of itself. Capture types and samples you can obtain are also described on the permit. So not just anyone can take blood samples for, say, genetic research. You have to be trained and show that you know how to safely draw blood from the bird, and that will be described on your permit. For example, I had Dr. Kristen Schuler from Cornell. She's a Cornell wildlife veterinarian. She came and watched me draw blood from chickens and guinea fowl on my farm, and then wrote a letter of reference confirming that I was competent at this method. All right, but let me back up. You need reference letters from experts in the field that have seen you capture and band to even be able to get your master banding permit, right? And nowadays, I'm being asked to write these letters for prior students that worked in my lab as sub-permittees and now are waterfowl biologists at the state level. Again, when we think about all of this, and people I think are flippant about what it takes to be a waterfowl biologist and do all of this work, none of the work we do as waterfowl biologists is taken lightly, and the bird banding process is just the same, right? The bird banding process and how we band waterfowl is rigorous. Banding, or what is called ringing, yes, R-I-N-G-I-N-G, ringing, in the old world or Europe, banding or ringing was officially established in North America in 1922. Nowadays, the USGS Bird Banding Lab is in charge of banding operations in coordination with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Migratory Bird Office that physically helps band waterfowl and uses complex analytical approaches to understand how many ducks, geese, and swans of what species need to be banded and by what geographic region, so we can have confidence in data derived from these efforts. So the geographic regions designated where we band waterfowl are called banding regions, and then we also determine from these banding regions where ducks are recovered. That is called harvest derivation. So for instance, harvest derivation, or the percentage of harvest derived from a specific Great Lakes banding region in, say, Tennessee, might be 15%. So to a large degree, this is how we understand that ducks typically stay within flyway regions well enough to use the Pacific, Central, Mississippi, and Atlantic flyways as management units. Of course, there are those ducks that buck the trend, but not enough to discount management at the flyway level to date. We also have specific harvest management zones for Canada geese and some other species based on recovery locations from banding on known breeding colonies. This information, it is used to manage harvest of Canada geese. We often refine this information with telemetry data, but a simple example of this is when we're looking to conserve a specific population of Arctic nesting geese, but then they also mix with kind of the local golf course nesting geese on migration and wintering grounds. We need to know when the migrant population of geese from the Arctic show up and where. In this way, we can set more liberal limits for the local geese because the long-lived but lower reproductive output Arctic nesting geese can't take the harvest pressure that the local geese can. So from banding, we know by recoveries when those Arctic geese show up and when we should truncate the season and become more restrictive to conserve those Arctic nesting populations. A little wrinkle in the banding data that has been acknowledged but infrequently tested otherwise is that ducks often fly relatively great distances to be banded. That is, where they breed does not always reflect their banding location. When we catch a duck that can't fly at this point, we designate it as local, quote-unquote local, because it must have come from the local area. Can't fly yet, can't go anywhere, right? But that is way less common than banding a duck that hatched that year that can fly. We designate those as hatchier ducks in the banding database. Adult ducks are designated as after hatchier birds. Here's a specific example about how ducks move around to get banded. When we at ESF were trying to understand more about the eastern mallard population, Kayla Harvey, now Maryland waterfowl biologist, was banding and taking a feather sample from mallards for stable isotope research. That feather can tell you where the duck grew that feather using the stable ratio of light to heavy hydrogen isotopes that are incorporated into that feather where it is grown. What Kayla found was that about 50% of our hatchier mallards that we banded in New York grew that flight feather in Ontario or Quebec, outside of their banding region. So let's say we band 2,000 ducks at a banding station in the Canadian prairies. It is quite possible that many could be coming from the Canadian parklands, that transition zone between the prairies and boreal, or maybe even the boreal itself. Understand that it is easy to band ducks in some places and not others, and we will always have to incorporate banding effort into our understanding of harvest derivation. But we also need to recognize that there are places that ducks exist where we just never band. But instead, we also might band those birds elsewhere once they fly into a location, say, further south where they can be banded. This is where stable isotope analysis of harvested ducks provides a less biased approach to understanding harvest derivation. So that's a bit about how we band and who gets to band, but now, how do those data get used beyond harvest derivation? Among the most important metrics are harvest rate and survival, which certainly differ in the information provided. Harvest rate is simply the percentage of ducks harvested per band put on by species, sex, and age, whereas survival estimates are much more involved and incorporate recapturing ducks in two different ways. Through reporting of bands by hunters after they've shot them, as well as recapturing them at another banding station at a later date. So yeah, let's say there's about 1 million waterfowl hunters out there that are able to recover a band again when that bird is shot, but we also very much need widespread banding stations to capture ducks again, especially if you want to understand to what extent hunting is involved in mortality. Specifically, we typically band ducks in two different points in time. During pre-season banding, which is intended to capture ducks after the breeding season and before hunting season, with the assumption that mortality is 0% between banding and the opening of hunting season. That's certainly not true, but in most cases pretty close to the truth. Then we band ducks during winter and spring after hunting season is over. If we capture a duck in September before season and then again after season in late winter, we know it survived the hunting season. But then if we never captured again, yeah, it might have lived, right? It still could have lived and we just never captured it again. But for instance, in the hen mallard database, we have a bunch of them we banned in preseason and then again in winter or spring after season, but then never again thereafter. And here is the important part. This is increasingly happening even under standardized efforts. So we seem to have more hens dying in the non-hunting season than ever before. That is a habitat issue. So right here is how we can use banding data to inform management. Do we need to regulate guns or do we need to focus efforts on habitat? All information screams habitat or at focusing on survival during the non-hunting season. So how many ducks does it take to have confidence in those estimates and have the information needed to sustain the duck population? The answer, a lot. A whole heck of a lot of banded ducks is what we need. In fact, since around the 1960s, we've banded over 6 million mallards alone, and over that time, 19 million total waterfowl, with 13 million being ducks. Having ducks banded during preseason and post-hunting season is important. Reality is that I think we've really scaled back where, when, and how many ducks we band. If we want to continue to support waterfowl conservation informed by duck banding, then we certainly need to pump millions of dollars into banding programs. We need to continue to send money north of the border from the U.S. into Canada for duck banding as well, because this is a collaborative effort. We harvest most of those birds anyway in the States, or said another way, we benefit way more from Canadian-derived ducks, geese, and swans than the Canadians do themselves. So no need to tariff the duck banding. We aren't getting a raw deal here. And for folks that have talked to me, I've been all in for years on duck banding. In fact, I don't think we're doing enough of it, and I've been quite outspoken about the cost of the Atlantic Flyway Mallard GPS study that has spent over $1 million on telemetry units alone before even considering staff time and grants to universities. So this is likely, I don't know, a $2-3 million study when all done. And it's only getting about a 30% return of ducks that go north for the breeding season and then come back to deliver data. And those data must be biased because the units communicate with cell towers, and dead ducks that don't return from cell tower absent areas can't provide data, and so on. Anyhow, I don't actually blame the Atlantic Flyway folks that adopted 20 years of watching a mallard population decline. Those folks had to do something in response to the continued decline in mallards, and telemetry was sexy. But imagine long-term what we could learn with banding and stable isotopes in an eloquent analysis. Imagine what we could have gained by putting hundreds of young, up-and-coming waterfowl biologists at banding stations, learning how to capture and band ducks, getting them into the field of waterfowl conservation and management. And imagine that. Imagine having enough ducks banded to conduct robust Lincoln-Peterson estimates among species. Imagine putting that $2 to $3 million into large banding programs and stable isotope analysis. Where would we be now? Again, the telemetry thing was sexy, easy to sell to the powers that be and duck hunters, so I get it. But the longer-term banding and stable isotope analysis would have been pretty cool, hopefully someday. So I mentioned Lincoln-Peterson estimators, and that's a way of using banding and harvest data to estimate total population size. Basically, you have a known number of individuals that you band. You can recapture a percentage of those by shooting and reporting bands. And from this, we can estimate harvest rates, or the percentage of the population that is harvested during a given year. And there's also a harvest survey, the HIP, which we just talked about each year, that gives us an estimate of total harvest. So we can estimate how many were killed, and we know the percentage of the population this represents. You can use these metrics to calculate the total population. Without getting into the weeds, that's how it works. It's really cool, straightforward stuff. All right, then. I've certainly missed a bunch of stuff that banding tells us, but these are the major hallmarks that are critically important to sustaining waterfowl populations in this country, critically important to the waterfowl management that happens each year and leads to ducks in front of your blind. None of this happens by chance. I do ask that you continue to support the USGS Bird Banding Lab and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Migratory Bird Office, as well as all the great USGS and academic science that has given us ducks over your blinds each wonderful fall and winter season across duck country, USA. Again, remember, none of this happens by chance. This is a legacy going back to the Aldo Leopolds of the world and continuing today with starry-eyed young kids that grew up duck hunting and want to see it continue into the foreseeable future. That is a lot, so I hope you got it all digested. Up next, thoughts about hen limits and some reflection and clarity on the Harvest Information Program. So please, stick with us. Look, folks, the Farmland Group across the Mid-South is your one-stop shop for real estate brokerage, consulting, management, lending, and appraisals. If you own land or you want land, the Farmland Group is where it's at. With over $500 million in farm sales and growing, Gwynn and Shelby Smith have you covered. Look, if you're thinking about buying or selling, contact the Farmland Group to access their full suite of services. If you already own property and want to build equity and value, the Farmland Group gets it done. If you're looking to purchase a new property, well, they get that done too, and they have access to some of the best lending available. Looking to sell? Get it appraised with the Farmland Group affiliated appraiser. But let's be clear for our listenership too. They also offer farm and hunt property management to create places that attract more ducks and more bucks. Who doesn't want that? More ducks and more bucks. Let the Farmland Group build value into your property. Find them today at farmlg.com. That's farmlg.com. You're not going to be disappointed. Contact Shelby Smith today at farmlg.com and let him know that the FowlWeather Podcast sent you their way. All right, so let's tackle hen limits again. Let's just tackle those hen limits one more time. It's not the last you're going to hear of it from me, but anyhow, I will repeat that we have no hen limit on gadwall, widgeon, teal, and so on, but we are splitting hairs about the hen limit on mallards like this is going to be the savior of the greenhead population. I mean, just stop. Just stop. The answer is not harvest or harvest regulations. Get off your butt and start finding a way to keep the habitat with us. At a time when environmental concern seems to be waning, we need the complete opposite for the wetlands and grass. So get off your butt and start finding ways to save it all. Remember, this also has to do with floods and clean water. Wetlands are the kidney of the landscape, and they also produce ducks. Can we please just quit talking so much about harvest regulations because it is wasting our time while the prairies wither and fade into oblivion and the ducks die and decline at a greater pace than ever before during the breeding season? Can we please just focus on what matters? Next, someone asked me this week how the HIP registration is used for calculating duck harvest. Again, and here are the cliff notes if you missed the last DataStream series episode. Registration in the Harvest Information Program, or HIP, is to develop a sampling framework. After that, a subsection of hunters are asked to let the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service know where they hunted and how many ducks, geese, and swans and other migratory game birds they harvested. Then another subsection of hunters are asked to mail their bird parts in, including wings, flight feathers, and tail feathers, depending on species, into the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Parts Collection Survey. From that, we obtain the species, sex, and age composition of the harvest. All of this information is scaled up for each state and flyway to determine how many ducks, geese, and swans and of what sex and age are harvested each year. Kudos to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service for developing a mechanism to keep track of our harvest and ensure it is sustainable among the ups and downs of the waterfowl populations on this continent. Again, bumps and bruises we have, but dedicated we are as the duck people across Duck Country, USA, dedicated to the long-term health of ducks and duck hunting. All right, another good one. Keep track of us this summer while we run the FowlWeather Podcast Young Waterfowl Professional Series, where we meet and interview the next generation of waterfowl and wetlands conservation leaders. They are our future. Check out the episode last week with Hannah Sabatier, up-and-coming waterfowl population ecologist. Thanks for listening, and as always, may your skies be filled and shoot straight, my friends.